So to begin, I want you guys to imagine yourself stranded on a desert island with just one other person. What do? Do you cooperate with them and try to work together and get the most food? Or do you compete against them and try to get more food than the other in order to survive? You might think at first that cooperation is simply the best choice. It's the most mutually beneficial. But if you really put yourself in their shoes, you might not be so sure what choice you'd make. Cooperation and competition in this situation can be simplified into a spectrum of two opposing bias sides, one being competition, one being cooperation. Life itself is made up of many different kinds of such spectrums. Everything from sexual orientation to your political affiliation, they're everywhere. And part of growing up is learning what your identity is and how you fit along those spectrums and how you can turn that to your advantage in life. So starting, I want to break down this spectrum of cooperation versus competition, and I'm going to start with competition. One of the first things that you might think about when you think of competition might be the negatives, maybe the stress or anxiety associated with it, but I'd rather start with the positives. In a competitive environment, one of the biggest benefits is innovation. Certain vocations, like engineers, take this idea into their very creed when they're trying to create the best machine or make the best building. Entrepreneurs use this idea when they're trying to create their products because in the market, only the best products can get sold. In this way, the stress from competition pushes entrepreneurs and engineers to try to make the best project or product that they can to try and innovate and deviate and try to be better than the others. As the president of this school's first robotics competition team, I see this play out firsthand every day. In 2009, our team reformed and had to rebuild itself from the ground up after having disbanded for 3 years. There are many really interesting stories from that time of reconstruction, but my favorite has to do with reading the rules. You see, at every kickoff event each year, we find out what our competition is, and they release a rule handbook. Back in the day, we only had one designated person who would read the rules, and they would determine through that how we would fit our robot into those rules for the whole year. However, one year, that rule reader had a bit of a brain fart moment, like we all do sometimes, and he misread the robot max height as being 6 feet. That year, when we went to competition, the robot inspector stops us right away and he says, that robot is way too tall, because the actual height limit was 60 inches. Since then, we've learned from our mistake, and now make sure to read the rules thoroughly each year for over an hour. It's been through little improvements and learning from mistakes like this that we've been able to slowly get better and succeed more over time. In 2016, we were semifinalists in our division at the World Championships. And we never would have gotten there if it weren't for the help and motivation that we got from competitive stress. Stress from competition can be a really great motivator, you see. A study by social psychologist Dr. Sander van der Linden found that found at the Princeton University Do It in the Dark campaign, which is a competition among the different residential colleges at Princeton University to conserve the most energy. It was the leading factor. During the competition, of course, they would conserve energy, but as soon as the competition ended, that was basically it. They'd go back to using the same amount of energy as before, and it was right back to where they started. So as soon as that stressful stimuli was removed, it was as if no progress had been made. Therefore, it seems that the stress of competition can be very useful. However, too much of it can be a detriment. In a very high-stress environment, it can be unhealthy and be harmful. For example, in the environment of the average high school. Especially around the time of junior and senior year, students tend to look a lot more at their grades, at their test scores, at their GPA, at the colleges they're applying to, and they tend to basically break themselves down into a series of numbers, and it can be really dehumanizing. This is especially true at the Union County vocational technical schools here, where students are often pushed to their limits and have to work even more. Living in such a chronic high-stress environment can be very detrimental to your health. For example, it can even kill brain cells, it can damage your immune system, and it can raise your blood pressure. So therefore, if you live in a completely competitive, as in totally zero of the other side of the spectrum competition environment, it can be very harmful and stressful towards you. However, that's where we must look at the other side of the spectrum. We have to look at cooperation. In a totally cooperative environment, you see solutions to the very problems that I just described in a totally competitive environment. Imagine instead of the cutthroat high school description that I just gave you, students would help each other. They would share their notes. They wanted to help each other as a whole learn and as a whole succeed rather than just the individual. In this way, students would have more time to focus on their own interests and their own needs, and rather than focusing on stress and being simple, basically test score generators. In FIRST Robotics, we actually have this concept called gracious professionalism. In simple terms, it means that everyone must be respectful to each other, no matter what. Within that is something called cooperation. It's basically a combination of cooperation and competition. It's the idea that robotics teams should be helping each other to succeed whenever they need it, no matter what, even if they might be competing against each other in the next match, which you would see happen. When we were still rookies and we were still trying to rebuild ourselves up, it was thanks to the help and good nature of other teams that we were able to really succeed. It wasn't just our efforts alone. And now that we're a much better team, we're able to even give back and help other teams who are now in the same place where we once were. So therefore, cooperation can be very beneficial, but it is not, of course, without some downsides. When you focus on a totally cooperative environment, and that is one where there is no competition whatsoever, then you lose the same thing that competition would give you, innovation. Because of a totally cooperative environment, there would be no real need to innovate or deviate. If you're always focusing on the same team, you're on the same side, it's all about the team success as opposed to personal success. There's no reason to try to make something better than the other or compete over the other because it's all about the whole. So as a result, if you focus on a totally cooperative environment, then at the same time, you might be sacrificing your own personal success. While it might be difficult to find a totally cooperative environment in the real world, a simplified example can be seen in history. In a very simplified version of the Cold War, the world was divided into two sides. You see the capitalist countries who had a very innovation and very competition-driven economy, where they would try to make the best products. They would have a leisure-centric society, and they would be focused on their own individual wants, so they would be driven more. And they would even trade with other capitalist countries in order to thrive. However, on the other side, almost like a spectrum, the communist countries had a more cooperation-focused economy. In this way, people were unhappy because they were trapped in a society where they could not move up, and there was no reason to innovate or deviate because there was no way they could move up or get any personal success from that. It was all about the team success. As you know from history, ultimately the capitalist economy flourished while the communist economy decayed on account of because they had the innovation and the competition aspect. Therefore, in a way, it seems like no one wins. If you look at totally one side of the spectrum on competition, there is so much stress, and it's all on you to find that personal success that it can be hard to thrive. Whereas on the other side, on a totally cooperative environment, you can sacrifice that personal success even more, and then you lose your innovation. However, we don't live in a world that's made up of these black and white features. We live in a world that's made up of different spectrums. There is no real totally competitive or totally cooperative environment. Every environment like that has a little bit of both. This can be symbolized by the yin and yang. You need a little bit of good and evil, and vice versa, in order for an environment to really succeed. This can be seen in many different kinds of spectrums. It can be seen in things like political affiliation, maybe gender, maybe if you're focusing on STEM versus arts. And similar to the way the center of the yin-yang wavers, as you travel through life, the different spectrums that you might be looking at may also waver. Maybe you'll be around a group of conservative Republicans, so your political affiliation spectrum would be more to the right. Or maybe you're focusing on being an engineering major, so you'd be more around engineering-related people than arts. However, this spectrum, as you travel across, is not out of your control to control. As you understand your identity and these spectrums, you can affirm this identity and have an effect on it. For example, if you were a Democrat and you happen to vote Democrat, then you would affect your community and then it would be more democratically aligned. Of course, that's what you would most likely to do. If you were a Democrat, then you'd most likely vote Democrat. If you were a STEM major, then you'd most likely go to a STEM school and be around more STEM majors. You would most likely go to the side of the spectrum that you are already aligned upon. However, I would encourage you to do something a little bit different, to take the path lesser traveled. Instead, I would encourage you to try to find the balance, to try to find the center, the yin-yang. Because once you do that, you might unlock a whole new world for yourself. You can see both sides of the same coin and both sides of every situation. You will unlock for yourself different perspectives that you might not have even thought of before. And once you've unlocked that, it will empower you. Thank you.